Morning, Deirdre.
Good morning, Tom. How are you today?
I can't, it doesn't get any better. I mean,
Terrific. You're
it's
in
a
your
beautiful
library.
day, right? It's a beautiful day. The sun's shining. It's warm, dry. Of course, that is 360 days in the desert, and I'm in my favorite library,
Yes, you are.
which means it's nonsense or not. So tell us about nonsense or not today, Deirdre.
Well, let me pull up my slides just to get us going here, Tom.
Okay.
There's our nonsense or not.
Okay.
And what nonsense or not is it's part of our deep business initiative on leadership and strategy. And we look at business literature, both classics and new, and figure out, does this item provide input to leaders on making leadership decisions, making strategic decisions, carrying out their jobs. And we felt it necessary to do nonsense or not, because you and I both feel, Tom, that so much of business literature today is not meeting that need, that it focuses on large corporations and the industrial age, and it doesn't support leaders. It doesn't have the broad context of the whole digital age. And so you and I felt that we had to start looking at these things and then filling in what was missing, because you and I are trying to get leaders to do business right, and they're not getting the support they need. So today's focus is on a very interesting book. It's a real classic. It's Execution, the Discipline of Getting Things Done, published in 2002 and 2000, revised 2009. And I'll get back to those dates in a second. And the overall themes are very basic, that execution is the job of the business leader, and that leaders cannot build a good strategy if they do not at the same time make sure that their organizations can execute it. And then the authors are unquestioned geniuses at this sort of stuff. Larry Bossidy had high-level C-suite roles at major corporations, one right after the other. Charan is a deeply known teacher, advisor, consultant, and author. Slight bit of context here, Tom, is that you and I have been working in the recordings we've done, in what we've published, in creating a framework for leaders in doing their jobs. We've published our radar screen, which sets out the mindset and the 8 characteristics. And it talks about things like the leadership and management model, and how you build strategies, and how you execute good judgment. We've also gotten into how you make decisions and how you negotiate well. Execution is another building block in this whole radar screen. It takes everything that I've just talked about and brings it down to the level of the company operating well, so it can create the value exchange, which we have as the main point of our whole radar screen. And one of the things to keep in mind these days is, when leaders have a corporation that's working well, a company of any size that's working well, strategies in place, of strategies being executed well, then the leaders have the mind space to be able to focus on things that are affecting their business. And we'll come back to that several times throughout the course of this discussion. So let's go on with this, and I'm going to talk with you directly now.
Okay.
So what this book covers is, it covers explanations of what execution means and how to do it. It discusses what the leaders call their 3 building blocks of execution, and then how these feed into their 3 core processes in execution. The bulk of the book is on these topics. And then throughout, as you'd expect from these authors, they give example after example of strategic processes and successes due to good execution, and some failures due to poor execution, and ways to do what the authors suggest. But the most important thing that this book does is it adds formality to the whole idea of execution as a discipline in itself, not just what people do, but what they should do. and they tie it to business results. You know, how many times have you seen, Tom, when we've been working with leaders, that they execute a strategy up here and then throw it out to people and say, okay, people do. And there's no connection between what the people do, what resources they have, what their priorities are, and what the strategy is. And this is why so many strategies fail, that the means is not in place, or the connection is not in place between the results the leader wants and the strategy the leader creates. And that connection, as Bossidy and Charan will keep pointing out, is execution, making sure that the execution in all of its richness is there. And one of the things that makes this book such a pleasure to read, and it is that you can sense the frustration dripping out of these authors when they're talking about the poor example, that leaders are just not even thinking about this execution stuff. And they give examples again that show how a leader thinking about execution could have pulled it off, could have led to success. And instead, they lost their job. The business failed, or there was some other drastic business consequence. And the stories are very well done along those lines. You'll be convinced. Now let's come back to the publication dates. I mentioned that the book was published initially in 2002, revised in 2009, but it was based on work that the authors did on industrial age companies. Remember that the 2002 to 2009 period is just when we were really shifting with some speed from the industrial age to the digital age. And then I will suggest that execution is even more important in the digital age, because you have not only the standard business processes, the standard things that need to get done, you have an extra layer of what we call the digital platform. That's the technology that is used to actually run the business. Plus, you have the opportunity to use technology in strategic ways to grow the business and create a competitive advantage. And once you're starting to talk about technology and the engineering and the processes, you need to get these absolutely right. A leader cannot create a strategy about anything related to technology and not connect that immediately to the installation and everything else surrounding the installation and the use of the technology. And that includes operations and how the processes need to be changed and how people's jobs need to be changed. And you and I talk a lot about change management. Well, this is a pure example where change management is so required whenever technology comes into the picture. And anytime you have change management, you know, Tom, you need absolutely solid execution here. And then I'll add another layer to this, Tom. You and I have been talking over the past week or so about all of the strange stuff. There's a technical term for you, strange stuff going on in the world today. We have the markets going up and down all over the place worldwide. We have political issues in global politics. Look at what's happening in the Mideast right now. We have US politics that has changed so tremendously over the course of the past month. And we know all of this, the economy, the global politics, the domestic politics, is going to continue to change. These are the sorts of things that leaders need to be focusing on. Their mindset needs to be open to perceiving what's happening and figuring out how to handle that for the business. So what they need behind them is the assurance that their company is executing their strategy well and on track to deliver results. And that makes execution so much more important, not only in the digital age, but in any sort of disruption, need for transformation, political and economic happenings, and so forth. And I'll just drop in right now that you and I are so concerned about the effects of what's going on in the world right now, that in a few days, we're going to be running a Sunday workshop on this, the effect of all of these things on businesses today and on the ability of the leader to lead a business. So with everything that I've just been saying for the past few minutes, I would say to my students who question the dates on this book, think of these authors as Aristotle. We read Aristotle today for the right reasons, for the wisdom, the clarity, for the thinking, for the processes. We don't worry that he isn't up to date on some of the cultural or grammatic aspects of it. So because these authors are Aristotle, they're worth reading. Look and just advise people to look for wisdom and the thinking that can be applied. And then just Tom, I mean, you and I have run so many businesses. We've had so many C-suite roles. We've been COOs and all of this. You and I know that this book is just nuts and bolts business. This is how to get things done. And it occurs to me that I never held up the book.
Oh, that's right. You
Book
didn't. Yeah.
execution.
Yeah, I love it.
And I'll jump.
And I think mine is a black cover, right? Didn't you?
Well,
Is that the current cover?
this is the revised
The
edition.
revised edition. Okay.
Because I had poured over it and had
Hmm.
actually had to distribute.
You mentioned, yeah, you
That was
mentioned
the
you had to
earlier
take
one
these
that I had
apart.
to buy the revised one. And I'll actually jump way ahead to the end and say everyone should read this book.
Oh, wow.
So,
Oh,
with that in mind, I don't want to give anything away. I'll justify
Okay.
that opinion going
we'll
forward.
ignore that comment.
But let's go forward. Let
Yeah,
me
so
take a breath here.
the thing that occurs to me about this, Deirdre, is that, you know, the point you were on just a minute ago, that I was mentioning to you, and I think I'm safe enough in saying this, that, you know, I was watching an interview with, not watching because I don't do much watching, I was listening to an interview of Elon Musk recently about his thoughts on a whole lot of things, but he was very clear about one of the critical aspects of what leaders have to do is to make sure that the execution processes are right. And that they're, your point, they have to be dealt with in a very meticulous and hard way. But his view is to start at one time, get it right.
Yeah.
And he has a whole method for doing that, which is fascinating, which we'll deal with at some other point. But his point was you have to spend the time on this stuff. It is not, now, it's not clear to me. I think he enjoys the challenge of getting the process properly defined. He enjoys that challenge because it's a hard thing to do. You and I know that. We've seen this. And your point is, this is work we as leaders have to do. So when you look at one of the 8 characteristics that we have that you tie back to is doing your job, your work, right? And you would say, you always have said, that one thing the leader has to do is to make sure these kind of things are in place so that you can free up, as you called it, mind space, to be able to keep your eye on the radar screen, right? Now, that's a hard subject itself. And we, as you mentioned, we have a whole, and that's where we come in, right? We'll help you with how to go about doing your hard work of this. And we always have thought this is a key element of helping you in this point that you're making. We call it the operationalizing of strategy.
Correct.
That's the term we use for the description you were going at, which is getting down there. And there is a process for that. And we have that we show our and teach our leaders that would like to have that capability that don't have it already. But the real focus of our work is on the 3 pieces of, we call them the 3 core questions that a leader has to deal with. One, what are you missing? And that's where you and I spend the bulk of our time.
Right.
Is on these, and especially we're finding that, and this has always been the case for everybody, right? That it's very hard for a leader to be able to see everything coming at them.
Right.
And it's very helpful to have people that can help you see what you might be missing, because it helps you to be ready for it. Not that you're going to get an answer then, but when it happens, you have at least thought about it and are more prepared than if it had just been sprung on you. We're doing a lot of work in that area, starting again on Sunday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern time, where we've got an open session where we'll talk about some of these hot spots that are likely not on your radar screen, but are on ours. But we think there's one of these is going to spill over.
Right.
And then that leads to, when that happens, you have to figure, okay, how do I adjust what I'm doing to match what that's doing in my radar screen, right? In my world, my
Right.
markets, my capital markets, my customers, their demand, the ability to get fungible capital for my business and them for theirs, right?
Right.
Our suppliers, our distributors, our manufacturers. And then it comes back down to, from there, as you said, then it's how do you actually translate that into execution? And we're dealing with that third question, and our third question is beyond the what are you missing and the motivations. The third question is, how can I do what I'm doing better, right? Or doing it and that's the execution piece.
Right.
And that's can be really dry. And, a lot of this, when you get into this, that's what strategy development is. That's what doing this execution work is. That's what the hard work of translating something into something more substantive. That's the hard work. We do that. We teach business modeling. We teach financial modeling. We teach the fundamentals of accounting. Why do we do that? Because you, as a leader, not that you have to be an accountant, but you have to have these capabilities in your toolbox. So when you are in there trying to make sure that that process is complete, correct, ready to be automated, that you have what you need to do it. Now we think of that as a challenge, right? Because we love that, right? We love to be able to at one time have a class on business modeling, and then at the other time talk about strategy, right? We love doing that. But as a CEO running a business, which you have done, you have a lot on your mind. So
Yes.
what we're asking people here, and the purpose behind Nonsense or Not, frankly, is to say everything almost, you're not going to have anything that's just raw nonsense. It's not likely. But everything's going to have some element of value. And you want to point out what that value is. Some have more than others. Some have more applicable value than others. This one it's really good that you tipped your hand early on this, because this is something we all need to pay attention to. There are a number of books that deal with this issue, and even we noticed that Ram Charan has gone forward, has other books. This is really the core, though.
Yes.
There are plenty of ways to do this. This is a good starting point.
Right.
And you do have some observations, I believe, about this, as I have. But you'll go through this. But this is one that I think it's worth everybody paying attention as you go through this, as painful as it might be, because it's not exciting. Bossidy comes out of having been, other than I think the time that he was at GE Capital, I think he spent most of his time in the industrial companies, right?
Allied Signal.
Yeah.
And
I think that was his last, if I recall.
Yeah, Honeywell and so forth.
Yeah. And he was one of those people that was down into the research and the manufacturing of hardware.
Right.
And a really, interesting executive.
Yes.
So you and I have liked this book for many, many years, and we've used it for many, many years. But as you did say, all in context, right? It's just like Machiavelli. You cannot take Machiavelli literally.
Right.
It's the essence. You're looking for the essence, and so with that, why don't you take us through this and then tell us, I think at the end, you're going to tell us, okay, where do I think how do I bring this up to the context of today?
Right.
Right. And you'll be taking us through that. So as people are going through this, if they haven't been through any of your nonsenses or not, they may not know this, but you're going to do all of what I've just described. You're going to do as you take us through this, right?
Correct. Correct.
Okay, I'll stop. I'll let you go.
Okay. Let me describe what execution is first by reading some of the phrases from the book. That the authors describe execution as a specific set of behaviors and techniques that companies need to master to gain a competitive advantage. Second point, a discipline integral to strategy. Third, a core element of the organization's culture. And fourth, a systematic process of rigorously discussing how and what, questioning, tenaciously following through, and assuring accountability. A lot of very important words there among these things. It's a constant theme of this book that you can't craft a strategy without knowing that the organization can execute it, that it has the people, that it has the resources, and they're in the right places. That's a whole other thing. And too often, and how many times have you and I seen this, Tom? There's a gap between what a leader says they want to accomplish in the strategy and then what their organizations can actually accomplish. And that gap is not just execution, it's the leader thinking about execution while developing the strategy. That a leader, if you're going to do an initiative involving quantum computing, you need to make sure you can hire the quantum computing scientists. I'm using that as an example because no one can acquire these people. They're very rare and so forth. But it's that sort of detail you have to get down to if you have a hope that your organization can execute. Another point to make here is that the authors repeatedly talk about the need for a rigorous process of discussion with the people who are going to be doing the execution. You can't make assumptions. You can't just look at an org chart and say, oh, we've got that group over there. The leader has to pull people in and talk through exactly what people do you have? Will they be available? What skills do they have? If we gave you this work, what would you need to acquire? What else? And with everyone involved and this back and forth between the leaders and the people who are going to be executing is what makes a strong strategy that delivers the results. In other words, the execution starts way before the leader hands off the strategy. It's built into the strategy process itself. It's actually, this is another point that you can tell that the authors were just holding themselves back. They make a clear distinction between strategies created by line leaders and by staff. And some people listening to us may not remember that back in the industrial age, large corporations had a staff department that did strategy. And it was on an annual basis, and they did the same things every year. Like, look at the strategy. Should anything change? No, well, let's just issue the orders. Same thing with budgeting. And I'll get to budgeting again several times in here. There was part of this thing was, oh, let's look at the budget. Budget looks okay. We'll just increase every number by 2% or 5% or whatever, and there's our budget for the year. And then this work of the staff people and the budgeting people, absolutely disconnected with the line people doing the work, created failures all over the place in business. People would say, oh, here comes the strategy, and we don't have to pay attention because we know it won't work. And so strategies never happens. And then again, the staff would do this. The authors are very clear that this is a waste of time and energy, and it leads to failure all over the place.
Deirdre, I could say to you, so as I mentioned just a minute ago, that anybody who could be listening to this saying, why am I bothering with something that's almost 20 years old, right? No, over 20 years old. but I would just tell you, you could listen to Elon Musk, who did this interview recently, and he said the exact same things that you are saying right now, the
Right.
exact same things. And one of the things that you and I do is you made a really important point that we go through when we do the process of operationalizing a strategy, taking a strategy and turning it into a workable, work by a group. That there are two aspects to this that you and I think are really important, and I'll just give the concepts and let you expound on them and connect them. But the one is we like to think of all these things, instead of calling them organizational weaknesses, we call them gaps.
Yeah.
They're gaps. Why are they gaps? Because you can fill the gap, or you can decide not to fill the gap, or you can say, I don't want to fill the gap, and
Correct.
not say, I don't want to fix a weakness, because it's not a weakness. It's about getting capital, not getting capital. Your job is to make risk-based judgments on how you move forward to get the best results for what you have, what you can work with, and what you can collect. Gaps is one, and then there's the issue of the leader manager model, and you were getting into that just a minute ago, right? Now, a lot of these concepts that you are pointing out here were the genesis of the ideas that we've had to create the operation, create the leadership and management model, create the concept of gap versus weakness.
Right.
So I love going back to this because it reminds you and me about how, when we were using these things to try to build businesses and make them work, we realized that perhaps the language wasn't as sharp as it might have been, or there was a lack of a structure that could be used to help you better think through how this works. So I've that's the other thing that comes through to me in a book like this. It helps clarify, if you are familiar with these concepts that we have operationalizing the idea of gaps and the idea of the leadership management model, you'll see it. You'll see the heritage.
Right.
If you're not, you'll see the need.
You'll see the need. And I'll actually do my expounding, Tom, by starting to talk about the building blocks of execution. It'll
Yeah.
be easier to do that. And I am going to share my screen, pull up a slide, but let me get to it. Just put before you, just so you can see it, the
Yeah.
three building blocks of execution. And the first one is the leader's 7 essential behaviors. The authors are saying, look, it starts with the leader. It starts with the leader doing the right stuff. And I'll get back to this in a second. The second building block is creating the framework for culture change. And I bet some of our listeners are saying, what? Culture and culture change, those are fuzzy things, aren't they? But the authors bring these forward and will explain exactly why as the real glue. And this is where the conversation about gaps start. Because so many of the initiatives that leaders have had to try to do over the past 20 years or so have to do more with creating the right culture around an organization. I mean, think about the phrase, Tom, learning organization, and how popular that was. Well, learning organization is pure culture. And making sure that the right people are in place, or that teams are in the right place. How do you build a culture around teams, and whether drawing people from various silos and putting them in teams, and how do they work together, and then how does their work flow back into the organization? All of this is sort of stuff is culture change, and that's why the authors have this as such a prominent point as a building block of execution. You can't execute if the channels aren't there that allow you to do the execution. And then having the right people in the right place. This is something I think that if Bossidy wrote a book on his own, the book would be about how to have the right people in the right place. He is so focused on this, and you and I agree, Tom, and we'll spend some time talking about that. I'm going to leave this slide up because I'm sliding into a discussion of the first point, the leader's 7 essential behaviors, and I want people to be able to see what these behaviors are as I discuss this. Now, the first point to notice about these are that they're behaviors. And you and I have been talking, Tom, about our radar screen, and we talk about our 8 characteristics of a great leader. There's a difference between what we talk about, the mindset of a leader and the characteristics of a leader and the behaviors. We're talking about the leader preparing to do the work. And the behaviors outlined here are the leader doing the work. So that what we talk about is a precursor to the leader being able to execute on these 7 essential behaviors. Knowing your people, insisting on realism. The word realism appears many times in this book. Setting goals and priorities, following through, setting the right processes, and so forth and so forth. And something to I guess remember about this is that the things that I pick up the most is the need that to really understand the organization. Picking up on several of these behaviors. And this ties back to what you and I were just saying, Tom, about a leader cannot develop a strategy unless the leader understands and knows the organization and can fit the organization or change the organization to fit the strategy. Leaders can't always change the organization. There may not be the quantum scientists out there who will come and work for you, for example. And then a deep knowledge of the people. And the authors actually give many examples of how bad review and reward systems lead to failures. That you can't just say, oh yeah, we've got a review system in place. It's sort of like, does the system work? Does it give you the information you need to make valid assessments about whether you have the people, whether you have to hire the people, whether you can promote people, how people need to be developed, and so forth. And then you get a sense of also in these behaviors that there are processes to build into the company's operations. Separate from the execution of the strategy, there are processes that need to be in place for the company to be operating well so it can pick up the strategy and execute that. One of those is one that I just mentioned, the review and reward process. You need to have that process in place so you have the means to execute on the strategy. One way to look at all of these behaviors is to say that, look, a business can't operate on autopilot. Too many leaders developing strategies just operate on autopilot. Every bit of an organization needs to be reviewed every time you build a strategy, review the execution on the strategy, make adjustments to the strategy, and so forth. That there can be nothing that you take for granted in this. I also want to make another point here. And this is one of the clues that this is an industrial age book. And that is that everything the authors are talking about here is so internally focused to me. It's focusing on the capabilities of the company. Now, you and I know, Tom, that a company exists in an ecosystem, in a marketplace, and that it always needs to have all parts of the ecosystem and marketplace in mind as the leader develops the strategy. So, you know, we've got to remember, I'll just say, I'm almost struggling for words because it's just so obvious and there's so much to say about it here. The leader needs to operate in a marketplace and in a business ecosystem because what's happening outside the business affects so deeply what happens inside the business and the capability of the business to operate outside. And that's in relation to customers, competitors, the industry, emerging technology, business and social factors, the economic and political factors we've been talking about, and so forth. All of this is external and needs to be taken needs to be kept in mind. And I'd say that the authors today would build that into their essential behaviors. Heaven knows we've got this on our radar screen. You and I.
So, Deirdre, you know, this whole subject of inside and outside the business is a huge deal right now. We we start with that, right? That's the whole point behind the leader's radar screen. And
Right.
say everything starts there. Now, as you know, you and I both come from industries where historically some of those companies focus purely inwardly.
Yeah.
I mean, especially the one that I started my tech career at, IBM. When I was there, most of the time I was there, it was an inwardly focused company.
Right.
And again, all of us are part of, we're built, you can learn two ways. You can learn on bad models or good models, right? So during that period, I saw both. I saw that the bulk of the time IBM was inwardly focused. It then had a very difficult time. They brought in, for the first time in its history, somebody from the outside to run the company. And fortunately, they did an outstanding job of choosing the right person. But that doesn't mean the person was well liked, right? They just happen to be a good fit for the moment. And we talk about this all the time. When we talk about these characteristics of a leader, it's how well do they fit?
Right.
Right. And contextually, how do they fit?
Right.
Leaders don't always fit all businesses forever. Right. And that's a very difficult thing for people to realize.
Correct.
The smart leader knows when they don't fit anymore and moves on and tries to keep them in. I mean, there are so many of these lessons that, you and I've learned the hard way that we wish somebody had exposed us to earlier in our career, but that's one. And but there are some famous companies who were built with leaders during that period who did focus on the outside. Jack Welch was one. I mean, many people have a lot of issues with Jack Welch's leadership styles and all kinds of things, right? But he did write a very interesting book, and I believe the title was Winning, right? Isn't that the name of the original book? Right. And that whole book is, again, externally focused. It's about how do you evaluate the market that you're serving? How do you evaluate the position of your part of that business against that market? And then how do you compare and contrast all that? And what is your strategy for developing a market share that matters in that marketplace? Because if you don't, I will divest myself of that business. I mean, that was the whole point. And then he had this process. So there were, and that was widely viewed as an incredibly difficult place to work. And there were others who did that too, that had, whether they did it on their own, and I'm thinking of the ITT example. There are others that did it also, but these lessons are critical, and they're critical for your success. And this is our point behind that. The culture now is such, not the culture, the market that everybody functions in today, which is it's much more perfect information. And you and I could spend a lot of time on why has this market changed, right? But the market has changed because much of the value that was derived out of the value equation for businesses in the, especially prior to the digital age, that was because of imperfect information.
Yes.
And now with more, and this is a microeconomic term, but with more perfect information, your ability to extract value means it has to change. Where you derive the value has to change. You're not trading on somebody not knowing what is the real current value of my used car, right? So I know if I'm getting a good price from a dealer or not, right? I mean, or what I could be paying for that car that's available here, and I'm willing to pay an extra $300 because it's the color I want and it's local. That perfect information wasn't there for a long time, and people traded on the fact that there wasn't perfect information. And then also, along with that, distribution, availability of product, and those kind of things have become easier also. But regardless, these concepts are part of the reason why you and I say that much of the leadership and management models that were built, and by the way, are still being taught in business schools,
Yes.
are these concepts that have been developed during that age of less well refined business conditions.
Yeah.
And why you constantly, those of us that listen to you about this constantly hear you say, the digital age is not the pre-digital age, right?
Right.
And you cannot be doing what you did then and expect to be successful today.
Correct.
And we see that, and we are constantly adapting to where we see the gaps in the market and whether we think we can fill those gaps that we see that we think are strategic, that have value, right? But think about what I just said. It's an all externally focused thing. But now you have to turn yourself around the other way and then say, all right, once I've figured that out, which is a job in itself, and that's product market fit, right? I mean, that's a huge task.
Right.
Now you're saying to a CEO, Deirdre, I mean, this is what you're telling me. If I'm a sitting CEO today, you're telling me, okay, so Tom, we need to put aside a lot of time for the execution of this organization. And I'm going to tell you, Deirdre, I'm having enough trouble with product market fit. And you know that. You know how hard this is. By the way, how much have I spent on product market fit with you on on one of the companies you were dealing with?
Oh my goodness, yes.
And by the way, on two of them, now that I'm thinking about that, we're dealing with two right now where it's huge product market fit issues.
Correct.
But now you're telling the CEOs that are running those companies, you're saying, okay, now listen to me for a minute. You got to turn around and spend just as much time making sure you can execute this stuff.
Absolutely.
By the way, we all understand that, but we're going, oh my gosh, how do I do this?
Yeah.
So I'm going to ask you another time here, Deirdre. I see your 7 behaviors, but how do I do this? How do I do this? I think I have my plate full with product market fit issues. How do I carve out the time to do these execution issues? And by the way, I'll give you Elon Musk's answers, and I'll give you also some of other people, famous people that I know, what their answer to that question is, and some less famous. But tell me, what would you tell a CEO that's sitting here listening? Deirdre, I know everything you've said I agree with for the last half hour. I agree with you. Well, where am I going to get the time for this? How do I do that? How do I fit this into what I do every single day?
Well, a couple of answers, and then I'll defer to the higher expertise of Elon Musk. One is, hey, you and I, Tom, consult with leaders on exactly this.
Right. That's well, we
we
can
help
do
that. But I think another thing is to think about our leadership and management model here, where we have certain work that is the work of a leader, that's the strategic work. And then we have work that is execution, which is the work of the manager. And so the answer here is, do you have the right people in place? Have you hired the right person? And remember, one of the emphases of Larry Bossidy is getting the right people in the right place to handle the execution, to take your strategy and build your plan, make sure the resources are in place, the budget is there. And then what your role in this is then beyond hiring this person is to sign off on this, to oversee the execution, to evaluate the execution, to make sure the results are there, and then to evaluate and revise as needed. In other words, you have to build the right team to help you with the execution, doing all of the work in our leadership and management model. And you know, Tom, to my mind, the very simple answer is you've got to do it. Execution gets into product market fit. They're not separate things. You have to execute properly on product market fit. If you don't have an execution mind fit, then what in the world are you doing trying to get product market fit? You should have already had an execution plan in place to do this work.
Yes, and that's a very hard thing to do. And it's hard to know the balance, right? It's hard to know how much time do you spend preparing for product market fit versus how much time do you spend on it? And then how much time do you spend modifying your execution to match where you're going with your product market fit, right? And keep that together.
And, you and I talk, Tom, about how leaders build their guts, their instincts, their facility in making businesses work. And what you're talking about right now is someone who has spent the time specifically working on building the mindset, working on building the characteristics, working on building the behaviors so that when the time comes that they're in that leadership position doing this stuff, they have the knowledge, experience, and practice to just make it happen because they know how these things work. And they may not think of this as execution. That might not be the first word that comes to mind, but it's building, leaders build their capability to know what to do, the strategy, and then just with their facility get it done.
So I'm going to just tell you what I think Elon Musk would say. No, I can't do that because nobody can speak like Elon Musk. He would just say that's what the nights are for, right? Because every story I've heard that is about anecdotes that I've heard, whether they come from him or others, they come from his biography that he wrote with Walter Isaacson, or from things I read or things I've heard him say. It's 10 o'clock at night, 2 o'clock in the morning. One was 4:22, and he did some kind of takeoff on the answer 42. He should have known that it was going to be at 4:42 that he'd get the answer. And for anybody that doesn't know that, goes back to Douglas Adams and the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And the answer everybody was looking for is how do you explain the universe? Right? What's the answer? And the answer is 42. You would not know that because I imagine you haven't read The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, have you, Deirdre?
No, I haven't. But Tom, I was kind of shy about saying that, but how many 100-hour weeks have you put in?
Oh my God. Or are we putting in right now? Mine is because of inefficiency. Yours is not that, but no, that's exactly right. That's what makes these jobs so hard, Deirdre. And and you read, it just takes it. And I know everybody who's probably listening to this already knows that. But those who are trying to get these jobs, that's the thing they have to realize is that, and you have to have time to let your mind settle, because if you don't, you'll never do anything right because you'll get trapped up. But so you have to find some way to find some relaxation of some form. And it just has to be healthy, because the problem is too many times it's just too easy to use unhealthy habits.
Yeah.
To create some relief, and that's really bad. Because that is a cycle that doesn't work for people that do this. But anybody that does anything really, really well, and we've talked about this before, is doing things well is hard. And if you think it's easy, it's because you haven't looked deeply enough at that subject to understand. And that's the beauty of these things. And execution is a key part that most people never spend enough time learning about before they are thrown in to have to do it. The one thing I would say is, I think at some point, Deirdre, I would like to ask you to put Jack Welch's winning book on the screen. I mean, on your list of nonsense or not, because some of his, again, it's that there's really good stuff in the whole ITT story is worth also, maybe in parallel, you could do two at one, because they are similar type of thing, except there was not quite the theme of strategy in ITT that there was a different approach. There was a different value proposition for the marketplace. But regardless, I think those are worthy because they are more coming at the other side of this equation. But the one thing that has bothered me. So how do I, and you may tell me, look, let me go into core processes before I do this. So I'm going to throw the question out and then you can say, just let me put my next chart up. Um, the issue of time, right? Because we talk about time is your friend or time is your enemy. And you know, it's important to try to, you can't usually uh, if, make time your friend. Usually time is given to you and you have to evaluate, is it my friend or my enemy in this situation? And what does that mean to me? And how do I then proceed? And that's the whole, we train that, right? I mean, that's what the whole decision making judgment, that whole symposium, the judgment symposium is all about, is sharpening your ability to do that, to judge the time you have, the hard thing you have to do, and how can you accomplish what in that time to make some progress right toward a goal.
Right.
But
And,
when you, how do you figure that into this?
well, it's in several ways. One, and now I'm jumping all over the outline of the book here, so we'll come back and recover it. But one is that the better a company is at execution, the more it's in control of its time. That if
That's a really good point.
if the people and the resources are in place, you can plan on getting things done in a certain period of time. If their processes overall in the company are working as they should, then you have control over your time. So it's just a well-built, well-organized, well-executed company is in control of its time. I think another point to make is that, and I am going to come to this when we discuss the people processes that are so important to Bossidy, that Bossidy makes a point of saying that when looking at people, whether people are right for their role, I'm just trying to find here, they look for people who can work in a certain way that supports the company. They look at their past records to say, here it is, I found the sentence, that they look for people who have demonstrated decisiveness on tough issues, the ability to make difficult decisions swiftly and well, and then act on the decisions. Now, time is built into all of those three things, even though the word time was not used. Decisiveness requires working on time, not spending too much time doing something. You make a decision and then that's how you move ahead in the absence of other factors affecting the execution. The ability to make difficult decisions swiftly and well. Well, this is one of the things, Tom, that you and I are working on in some of the workshops that we're doing. It's how do you make the decisions? How do you build your judgments so you can make the decisions quickly that are right in the circumstances for the company and then make them on time. You can't just linger over these. You can't wring your hands and so forth. But there are processes underlying making decisions and executing judgments and so forth. And do you know these and can you move along them at the right pace of time? And then acting on the decisions. And this is a slightly broader topic because there's a whole concept in business, and I think it's a plague right now, that decisions are made and there seems to be a gap between the decisions made and the execution of the decision. Do you act on the decision? And this is why Bossidy and Charan talk about execution as a discipline of getting things done. It's my observation that too many companies today, and I'm sure this was I know this was true back in the industrial age. I think it's more done though in the digital age where people are caught up on technologies and caught up on processes and caught up on perfecting a product before you actually get it in the marketplace and so forth, that there are gaps between making the decisions and actually doing the action. because people are susceptible to things like, oh, let me make one more round and fix this one thing before we get this product out into the product market fit process. And you need the discipline of saying, stop. Let's get it out there because you're going to be making changes in the product anyway, and so forth. So that execution is the discipline for imposing actions once the decisions are made. So I'm sort of coming at this from different points of view.
No, I mean, this is exactly right. So I want to pursue one more thing before I let you go on. And I know that you're probably going, oh my gosh, just let me get to my next slide.
No, ask the
Okay. So I've heard you say a couple of times, even including just a few minutes ago, you think I'm doodling here or doing email. I'm not. I'm actually writing my notes down here. I'm just so you know, I've got them all sitting right there. So, and I know that those of you that know me know I do this. So the one thing that struck me is you said one of the critical things is to have the right people in the right place. And you just went through a whole description about how critical that is. And you've said it 4 or 5 different times now. In different contexts, you've said how critical that is. All right. You and I have developed over the time. You know where it's coming. We don't like to spend time on groups and group work. We think, and you used the term at one point, I heard you say building teams. We believe in building teams or in creating teams or in assembling teams, using teams. We do not think there is much value for what we do. Now, if you're putting a jury together, that's different.
Right.
But take a second, if you would, and explain to us why just taking the people that you have and assembling them into groups and is versus carefully sorting out and may include getting rid of almost everybody you've got and replacing them is not a better answer. So please go through, and I'm throwing out the economic reason why you may not do that, but
you're actually talking about one of the reasons why we do these nonsense or nots, because it's my sense, and you know I can be a little strong on my judgments about some of these points.
no, yes, but you're very elegant in how you say it.
It is my sense that one of the unfortunate themes in business today is, oh, everyone is equal, so let's just get a group of people into a room and brainstorm. Brainstorming like that is a waste of time, because no one has a sense of what's really going on, what really needs to be accomplished. People go off in their own directions without the discipline of having processes in place toward working toward any sort of solution. They have no goals in place. It's possible for them to just meet several times and come up with an idea that is totally off base. And meanwhile, in doing this, a company may be depending on a group of people coming up with a solution, and they've just wasted their time. Teams are completely different things, and this needs to be understood, that good teams involve an identification of the skills required to accomplish a specific goal. Teams aim at accomplishing a purpose, a goal. So if I'm going to develop a new product to accomplish something, I need on my team someone who knows the marketplace, someone who understands how these things are manufactured, someone who knows how to sell these things, someone who knows customers really well in this marketplace. So to provide that perspective, someone understanding the underlying technology. So you get and so forth. People with underlying skills who can sit around a table and say, this is what is needed, this is what is needed. Let's work it all out together from the perspective of our skills, knowing what goal we're going from. It's the purposefulness of the activity that I think is really the distinction here. And I think one of the confusing points is a perception of, well, if we let everyone be creative, then solutions come out naturally. I don't agree with that at all. I believe that creativity is driven by processes. And I could give a 2-hour lecture pulling processes from all of the philosophers throughout the ages of how they come up with ideas and develop ideas and come up with solutions and work and create a symphony or create a novel or things like that. People work with more process in their creativity than I think is acknowledged in what I'll call the conversations of the age. And the same thing with good teams. They work with processes underlying their creativity, drawing on the skills that are appropriate to the results the team has been asked to deliver. And that's why group work goes so wrong so many times, while good teams are incredibly productive for organizations.
You brought to mind a an entrepreneur I know who used a process, a creative process, to come up with a brand, not just the name, but the actual visual brand and so forth. Now, the way she did this, and she would be terribly embarrassed if I told you this. She's a brilliant entrepreneur, by the way, very successful. And she did something very interesting. She left the corporate world mid-career and created her own company and just moved to where she wanted to live and did it. I mean, you gotta just, and now she lives at this beautiful farm in Colorado, right beside where her business is, and has horses and, all kinds of stuff. And, enough land that she can ride on her ranch. Anyway, to create the name of her company, and I won't give it because I don't want to embarrass her. But it's brilliant. The way she did it was she was still at the advertising firm that she was working on in Chicago. And she filled a room. She actually paid the company to do this. She filled the room with white paper on all the walls. And she said, all right, for the next few weeks, everybody put your ideas down and then let's build on all these ideas, but let's not have a meeting.
Yeah.
And in there, somebody came up with this brand by taking the name, the physical representation, the way it was described, because somebody liked the name, so they drew what they thought the logo should be, which was beautiful. And then somebody took and said, no, the color needs to be this. And then they did that. I mean, and then she ended up winning these huge brand awards as a result of doing this. That is the way you can develop. Now, I listen to what you said. You have to have a process, and everybody that does really outstanding work does have a process. You may not see it easily,
right,
but they do have a process. Now, some people, and just all you have to do is there's a great book, and I know you know about this, that somebody wrote about the habits of creative people, and it focused mostly on writers, but a few composers and a few artists, and it's a wonderful book. It's got 2 or 3 pages on every famous name. You could almost, not every, but almost. And where the history is known, it goes through, okay, how did Beethoven spend his day, right? Or how did Picasso spend their day? Or how did Steinbeck spend his day? Or how did Alice Munro spend her day? Or, just went through and did it. How did they pursue the creative art? Fascinating. You went all the way from people that they had to spend the whole day drinking coffee at espresso shops in Paris and going to the mailbox and sitting there thinking. And finally at 7 o'clock at night after dinner, and they'd had a glass of wine, they sit down and they write, but they only write until 10:21 and then they stop, right? Or people that got up religiously and started just writing anything, and their goal was to write 5 pages. And it didn't matter what it was, but they didn't quit until they got 5 pages. Or other people that said, I have to do 12 pages in 4 hours, right? I mean, when you go through and study that, you realize it is exactly what you said. And these are people that did incredible things, right? Produced incredible things. but they all had a process, and it was hard work. I mean, I never read one of those, and there must be 75 or 100 people there that spans a lot of time where there's history, but it goes back pretty far, where they weren't working really hard at
Yes.
at their craft.
Yes.
And so regardless of what it is, it takes the raw down to the process of doing the work, even if it's creative work that
Yes.
we would define as highly creative.
Yes.
But in order to execute at something incredibly innovative, it takes a lot of work.
Yes.
And for those, and I know I'm speaking to the crowd when it comes to somebody who's built an entrepreneurial business or is in the later stages of building it or product market fit, but anybody that wants to do these jobs or is aspiring to do these jobs or coming out of the corporate environment wants to go in to become an entrepreneur, this is what you're facing, is this kind of a lifestyle, right? So
Right.
you have to be ready for that and wanting to do it. Now, you and I've we spent half our career in corporate America and then half our career in entrepreneurial America. And I've had a whole lot more fun in entrepreneurial, but I've had a lot more ups and downs and highs and lows, and a lot more satisfaction,
Yeah.
and a lot more big disappointments. But I think that's what life is all about. And so let's come back to this. So it's process and execution.
Mm-hmm.
And then we talked about doing your own work.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about having certain characteristics. They actually have, theirs is not characteristics, it's behaviors. You have to function this way.
Yes.
And they focus on the people. And
Yeah.
you've gone through now and you've talked about you have to have the right people in the right place, which is hard.
Right.
And it's hard to find people that fit that.
Right.
And you can't just collect people and do it. You have to actually purposefully seek them out for the role, which means you have to define the role
Right.
really well. And you have to know what you need.
Right.
And not just for today, but what you need in the future. And then how much do you buy forward?
Right.
When you can. What else can we learn from execution, Deirdre?
Let me jump ahead, and we've sort of vaguely covered the building blocks of having the right people in the right place and having the right culture. I think we've said enough, but let me go and pull up another slide. And that slide has to do with the three core processes.
Okay.
And look at this. The people process links people with strategy and operations. Strategy links strategy with people and operations. Operations is linked to strategy. You get this sense here that these three things are linked. Now, the authors felt they wanted to distinguish among each of these processes, and I'll make some points on each of these. But this gets back to what we've been saying several times repeatedly throughout this throughout our conversation, Tom, is that you can't have a strategy unless you've got the people to execute it and the operations in place to run it. So the authors talk a bit about how to get these sorts of things in place. Let me pull down the slide and just talk to you. And this is, the first one was the people. The people process needs to be linked to strategy and operation. And this is where they talk about a company needing a framework for determining their talent needs in the short term, midterm, and long term. So they can either hire people they need or put people in new places. They can develop people who are promising, or they can start out long term and say, you new hire, you're starting to prove your worth. Let me start to give you the assignments that will develop you as an individual. The authors talk a lot about the need to identify development needs so you can build the people you need internally. And all of this is strategy driven, that the strategy tells you what people you will need short term, midterm, and long term. Now, you and I, Tom, when we're building strategies, talk in a framework of 5 years. You need to know at least 5 years out what you're going to be doing, what funding you need, what operations you need, and so forth. That's a minimum to have a strategy in place for identifying your people needs. And in these disruptive times, it may not be possible to go farther out, although you should be able to, if you're paying attention, say, we're going to need more people who understand AI, not just what it is, but how it can be used strategically. So we've got to build people, identify people internally, and start to create an AI workforce, or start to create a quantum workforce, and so forth. You need to be thinking that far out so you're not surprised all of a sudden that you can't do something because you don't have the people in place. You're building a pipeline. I mean, that's what it is. And it's an active process. The authors also make a very critical point here, Tom, and that is that HR must be linked to results. Right now in corporate America, HR is not the most widely respected function by and large. They're process people who tell you no. They handle benefits, they handle paychecks, but they can't do anything really productive. That's the perception.
Right.
Well,
That's not necessarily, we don't necessarily agree with that. It's
we
just,
don't, but that's
right.
the perception out there.
Yeah.
But the authors
By the non-HR professional,
by the
somebody that
non-HR
doesn't
professional.
understand it. Right.
Oh, this perception drives HR people crazy. But what the authors are saying is that that's an impossible state of affairs, that
Yeah.
there need to be these pipeline and talent development processes that need to be what the company as a whole does, independent of specific execution or specific department or specific functionality. And that needs to be driven by HR. And it needs to be done because in the midterm and long term, this will be what drives the results the business wants. So that's why they're talking about how HR needs to be handled differently by good companies here. HR is a resource that drives toward goals, not just process people who tell you no. Second core process here is strategy is linked to people and operations. And this is the strategy requires knowing how to execute. This is what we were talking about before, the need for all of the conversations for building execution into strategy while strategic plans are being built. And if you remember what I was saying just a few minutes ago about our leadership and management model, we have the leader hiring the people who will do the strategy, approving the plans of action, the execution plans, reviewing the execution as it happens, evaluating the results of the whole thing, and then making any changes needed to achieve the goals. And that includes revising people, revising processes, revising operations. So even while execution is its own discipline, the leader needs to be, and the leader representing strategy needs to be absolutely involved in what's going on at all times, because the leader is the one held responsible for the results. The leader can never escape the responsibility of having to stand up at a stockholder meeting and say, we made our goals or we missed our goals because. And the leader is responsible for making sure that they can say, we made our goals because execution was right. Very, very important here. And this is where the whole realism comes in. I mentioned that the authors use the word realism. One of the ways the authors say a leader does this is being absolutely fundamentally realistic. It's not that, oh, we've got a team out there that's supposed to do this, we'll let them handle it. It's, can that team do it? If not, let's train them or build a team that can do this because we need it for execution. The leader cannot say, oh, let's give someone another 3 months to grow into their job because they need the execution today. They don't have, and this is where HR comes in. HR should have been out there developing the people who can step into these roles and so forth. And it comes down to, and then Tom, I'm almost laughing when I say this, but you and I both know this is a major problem, that the leader must make sure that the strategy execution will allow a business to make money on a sustainable basis. Too much of what you and I see in the digital age, Tom, is a business building a product, building the processes around it, but never going the extra step to make sure that the execution's in place to become a success in the marketplace. That is to make a profit as a business. It's not just process, but it's a functioning business. And to the authors, that means it's a profitable business. You actually make money here.
Yeah,
And
this is really interesting. This is really interesting. You know, we believe these same things, right? We believe these same aspects. We think of these processes. We actually take it down a level, right? We call it, but we think a slightly different way of defining them, because we deal with strategy at a higher level, right? So what we do is we say, all right, now what you need is you need to have the right leaders in place, the right managers in place, and you need to have the operations in place. And then each one of those have 12 key capabilities that we believe have to exist in the organization at various points in time to be able to properly execute at the lowest levels of the organization. Now, you and I took it down to that level, and we believe you have to have the leaders in place, then the managers, and then the operational side for the reasons we just talked about, because the strategy has to come, the vision, mission, strategy has to come first. Then the model you're going to use for this structure of then processes underneath. And so, you know, this is why I think this book is appealing to us, because it is another way to look at how we think. Judgment book is a similar thing. There are various books that have given us another way to look at this. It helped us along the way think about how to make things that work all the way down, because the weakness that you see, I know you and I see in the way we are taught, the way we are mentored, and we're talking about all the way through being a CEO and the mentors of CEO, it's that you don't get down. It has to fit, so that if somebody says, well, I get your management model, but how do I go down a layer? We can take you down a layer. Or
right.
How do I go up a layer? We can take you up a layer. Or how do I go all the way to execution to the bottom? We can take you down. And the lack of that cohesive model has been a troubling to us. But if somebody said to us, well, can you take apart the operational side of the business, the delivering results, you might actually start them out with Bossidy's book.
Yeah, absolutely. Just understanding the need to do this sort of stuff. I'm sitting here kind of chuckling, because I can remember one business manager that I was mentoring, who came to me with a beautiful financial model, beautiful business plan. And I'm looking at it and saying, where's the cash flow? You know,
Oh, yes.
that it
I
was
remember you have,
beautiful.
you end up with those. Yes.
Beautiful Excel spreadsheet, all the calculations right, that a lot of, and you and I were talking about this the other day, that the very siloed nature of business, that the lack of general management and so forth keeps people, even at mid-career levels, from understanding the need to drive down to financial success, or what has to happen across the organization to drive to financial success. I can't tell you how many students have actually giggled when I said, so where's your profit? Oh, profit. Yeah, profit. And so forth. And it interested me that these authors had to make the point that this isn't just processes, it's a functioning business,
Yes.
which is defined as a profitable one.
So, you and I have a little bit more easier time in this, but one of the ways you described this book to me when you were refreshing my memory before I had gone back and done my own refresh. No, actually, I think it was just this morning when you said this, was where you said you can almost feel them popping out of the pages with their frustration because people don't get some of these concepts. The people inside their business, I think that was the concept that the people inside the business they're writing about.
Absolutely, that people just don't understand. People get tied up in their own little function in a business. And now we're talking, what we're really talking about now, Tom, is the reason that the authors focus so much on cultural change. A good company with a good culture would not have people so siloed that they don't understand the overall flow of the organization, the overall goals of the organization, their role in the overall process, and what needs to be accomplished and why. We talk about the cascading of goals down through the organization so everyone understands the strategy and the goals and the purposes. And that's our language, not these authors' languages. They're talking about the same thing, that good execution gives everyone the understanding about their part in getting things done in the organization. This is why it's a discipline. This is why the review and rewards processes need to be in place. This is why all the cultural aspects need to be in place, the all people processes in place, and so forth. Because without these capabilities in a business, someone's not going to do something and you become a failure as a business. There are too many stories out there about a department not understanding that something has to happen, so it just wrecks the whole strategy.
This gets back to fit of the team. So we have one CEO, entrepreneur, incredibly successful, who, is the typical founder, tech founder has real estate development going on and tech company and, all kinds of other things. And for one of his companies, he's looking for a COO to drive execution. But fit is critical there because the business too, I think, a little bit, Deirdre. Yeah. Well, you actually do know it. That it's a tricky place because it's cutting edge technology, a leading edge thought process that, by the way, solves the problem of the problem that we experienced with major outages a few weeks ago. I won't name names, but we all know that there was a major outage that almost everybody suffered from that was on a Microsoft platform. And his product solves that problem. So everybody that was part of his process didn't even notice it. A COO for that business, because he is Elon Musk type. He knows no hours. His free time is whenever his free time is. Right. And sometimes it's 10 days in Europe to watch an F1 race, right? I mean, but other times it's 24 hours a day and he's working in his car overnight, right? As he's moving from place to place, he's on conference calls, and he's been on them with me because Deirdre and I work crazy hours, as we did again last night. Although you had when you did have downtime, which was caused by me needing to do work for you, you were watching the Olympics. So that wasn't a terrible thing for you. So
that's correct.
Regardless, you were but you have oversight.
That's correct.
Right? And leadership responsibility for my work. So
and requirements for the work getting done.
Yes, you do. Yes, you do. But no, and that actually is true. But in this particular case, finding him somebody is tricky. Now we think we found him somebody, but it's tough because the fit, they have to be execution, they have to be right.
Yeah.
They have to be right. They have to be deep technologically. They have to be able to get in there and know the answer that needs to be fixed and they need to lead a team of really tricky software engineers, right? And operational people who have their own operational section, but they also have a cloud connection. I mean, it just, you can't make it up. And then they're doing very high level other things going on. So finding somebody there has been a challenge and is a challenge, but there, half of it is fitting it to the culture. It's not just, here are the skills. We could have done it. I mean, that's easy saying, here, I need somebody that does this, 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 but it's the cultural fit
Mhm.
and actually understanding. And one of the things that the CEO of this company, the founder, has done is he has morphed the culture into a healthier culture. I think this person could actually add and build on that, and that's what we need to do. But this is where you just don't go walking in and take over a team and expect that they're going to work the way you envision. And that's why you see so frequently a CEO comes in place, and the first person they replace is the CFO.
Yeah.
Because they have to be able to know that the CFO is culturally going to match how they think and how they need to function, because they're the link into a lot of the oversight of execution.
Mhm.
Now, you and I contend there's a lot more to execution than just the numbers, right? That just happens to be one of the outputs of execution. But the financial numbers, but be that as it may, that's a starting point. And then you and I both know, having been in that role, that having an HR person that you can actually get the results you need from that, and having them that they culturally fit with you is critical. And the same thing holds true for legal.
Mhm.
Those are the three that frequently are not. The finance many times is, but the HR and the legal, I was fortunate enough to have in most of the companies at least somebody solid that could do those roles. But when you have a company and that person doesn't exist and you can't get them, it becomes a real problem.
Yeah.
And today, a lot of HR, and I know you know this, Deirdre, so I know I'm not telling you anything you don't know. A lot of it is the value is compliance.
Yeah.
And so that has that element of that can be dry and appear to be unvalued by others, where it's a huge value to the company and the board and the owners,
Mhm.
if it's done well, right,
Right.
within the context of the culture of the organization. And that's the tricky part.
Right.
Um, you're getting into these really interesting concepts that I think are important that we elucidate. And so, what else about this book, Deirdre, do you think is valuable for us?
Yeah.
We've got the seven so the building blocks, the seven behaviors, the cultural framework for change, the framework for cultural change, and then the right people in the right place. And I think we've explored those pretty deeply.
We've done the building blocks, we've done the core processes. I obviously have more to say about everything here, but I'm not going to. What I'm going to do is jump to a slide I put together, or notes I put together on the role of the leader.
Okay.
Because I do want to make 2 points the leaders make, and then I'm going to get into our leadership questions.
Okay.
But the whole book is about the role of the leader. So it was strange to try to put this together. But a couple of points were not explicitly made, and I want to make them now. And that is, the first is that the execution requires a leader to be deeply and passionately engaged in the organization and honest about a reality. They need to be actively involved and not just presiding over the organization, as they are the only ones who can drive the rigorous disciplines surrounding execution. 2 important points to make here. The authors foam at the mouth about leaders who they perceive as just presiding over the organization. They've got the title, they go to conferences and so forth, but they don't actually work in the business. These guys like leaders who roll up their sleeves and get their hands dirty in what's actually going on in the business. And it's these leaders who actually make the right decisions and drive the right execution to achieve the right result. They've got examples of these presiding type leaders who are just utter failures because they never got in the business. And then they were shocked when the results didn't come through.
So Deirdre, can we just spend a second on that one?
Sure.
So one of the things I see that you do for many entrepreneurs as they're building their businesses is make sure they spend time in their business. And you say this all the time.
Yeah.
And because it's too easy to not spend time, actually inside your business doing these things. And it's always critical. But that is truly an existential failure.
It is, and particularly for tech entrepreneurs who get into starting their own companies because they like technology, they like sitting around and coding, they like to work with teams of programmers to create a product. And I also do physically drag them out, as well as you can over Zoom, drag them out and get them into the marketplace so they start the marketplace work going. What are you doing about this? Have you put together a financial plan? Do you understand what you're trying to achieve and go to market? And literally have to force this work out of them. But this is the only way that they will actually come up with something that succeeds in the marketplace. And it's a different sort of presiding, because I think what Bossidy and Charan were criticizing were the industrial age CEOs who are just personalities rather than people working in their business. A different side of this is the tech entrepreneurs who just want to build a product and assume that everything else will fall in place. And you and I know, Tom, that it just doesn't.
No.
They have to work on the business as well as doing their product development. But another point here, and the reason I actually have to drag them away to do this work is exactly the point I'm going to make, that it's only the leader who has the power and the prestige to drive this work. That in change, this is a prime focus of any change management engagement, any change management work, that a change management plan can go in place, but everyone will ignore it unless the leader personally gets down and talks with everyone and drives the change through the organization. The leader is the only one with the power and prestige to do it, and the organization will only believe in the change if the leader drives it personally. And I guess there's a third point to be built in here, and that many leaders don't understand how to convert a strategy into an execution plan. You see this in science all the time. Scientists get these ideas, but people can't convert them into bench experiments. But this is why the bench experimenters are so valuable in science, and the execution people are so valuable in business. What the leaders do know, or do have to know, is how to build the team that can execute. And that includes the person who will build the execution plan, and then all of the people down throughout the organization who will actually do the execution. This gets back to the emphasis on people. The leader needs to know how to build the right team to get the work done. So,
yeah, so I know where you're going. And I want you to go there, but a couple of points. So, may I ask you to put good to great? Jim Collins is good to great. Can I get that on your list for nonsense or not? So, because again, we're talking about books that are, if they're not frequently used, the concepts are used. That's the BHAG, right?
Right.
The big, hairy, ugly goal.
Right.
By the way, that's not my acronym, that's Jim Collins, and it's used frequently. I mean, I heard it just the other day by a young entrepreneur, taught that in business school.
Yeah.
And the second thought about this, Deirdre, is down the point about that you were making just a minute ago about this, you know, the one of the complaints that we always get about these, and the reason why we're taking almost as much time to do this review of the book that it takes you to read it, is why are we doing this? Because we're trying to help you bridge the context issue, right? The Aristotle issue. How is Aristotle valued today? Because usually reading the book is hard. Now, one of the things we could tell everybody is that many times we'll also tell you how to read the book. So Deirdre, if you could tell us also when you're getting to the end here, should they actually read this book? And if they do, what options do they have for reading it? Because Charan has done a wonderful job of helping Bossidy lay this thing out.
Right.
And so I'll let you now take it, and I know you want to turn to
Yeah, well, actually, I'll jump into this. This book is written very clearly delineated. By the way, the structure of the book is good, so you can jump around in it according, but it very clearly delineates what's text and what's examples. So that if you want to skip the examples, you know exactly where to skip the example. Although I would, just to see how these processes work out, I like processes. It wouldn't hurt to read the examples, but it's very easy to cut the size of the book in half, if not,
roughly in half. Yeah.
you know,
And it's really
but
well
just,
written too.
it's
You have to
very
hand
well,
that to whomever was involved beyond Charan. It's really well written.
beautifully written, to just read what the authors say about these basic points, the basic processes, about culture change, about people, about like, how do you go about this job, and then just skip the examples. You can do that. I'd also say, and this gets to our basic final, the questions you always ask me about a book. I'd say that any person functioning in an existing business needs to read this book to understand everything that has to be done about the book, about a business. I would say that entrepreneurs are not quite ready for it.
Mhm.
They have to work at a more, what I'll call, fundamental level. And this is where you and I sit down with them and work on the basic, develop your product. Here's how you do product market fit. Here are the things you have to do in the marketplace. And then once you get a basic flow to doing some basic things, then you read the book to understand how to grow the business when you're ready to start growing the business. Um, Definitely not nonsense. Clearly, there's an awful lot of very valuable stuff in here, but feel free to skip the examples if you don't think they're quite right for you. Let me go back very quickly to the leadership question. I'm going to just quickly run through a few slides here, Tom. Let's zoom past the processes, the role of the leader, which I've covered. Am I missing something? This is actually, you don't see it on the slide, but I have it in my notes. This is very situational. That these are questions that could be asked, but any leader would have to ask questions that relate the topics in the book to the business in particular. So along the lines of, and probably the question, how do I run the process, as the author discussed, points to the situational nature of this. Like, I'm building a couple of tech initiatives. How do I build the people processes needed to make sure that I not only have the people in place now, but build a pipeline of good people to do it? That would be something that someone would have to think about and look into it. What do I look for in the people I need to drive execution? How do you adjust this for small and mid-sized businesses and so forth? Motivations, their motivations are pure. We don't even have to look at this. They want businesses to do it well. This is the one where I think you flagged at the beginning, where leaders really have to take the time to think through, how do you actually do this? Because this takes active work and active planning on the part of the leader. You have to start with building your own leadership behaviors. And as you and I have said, we think this begins earlier by going to our radar screen and building your mindset and building the characteristics in you. It's the whole idea that the leader needs to build themselves before they can do a lot of the work that we're talking about. And you and I work with leaders on building their own capabilities before diving into this, Tom. Then they have to build a robust strategy process. And what I mean by that is they have to understand what we've been talking about the strategy process. They need to understand the full leadership and management model. They have to build their knowledge of the marketplace and the business ecosystems. They have to go through the marketplace analyses. They have to go through the competitive analyses. They have to think through what that gap is in the marketplace, picking up on your word gap, Tom, there, that you can now fill and so forth, and have all of those processes for these analyses to be in place. And then you have to start to build your people pipeline and your review processes and so forth. Then you have to review your operations. So you understand, and this is part of what I always say is part of the leader's mindset. Good leaders always understand the capabilities of the organization so they know where they can go in strategy. And then you have to build the execution culture. And is only when all of this is in place that you can start down the path of actually building the culture, building the strategy, which of course involves the execution and the people and the organization. So the way a leader starts to do this difficult work is to fill in all the background. And then you start actually doing the work as we've defined it. And I think that's one of the values of this book. Even though they don't explicitly talk about it, they keep pointing to it and pointing to it, that you need to work on the business, on the organization, to have that in place so you can then drive the strategy and execution as it needs to be done. Do you want to jump in here, Tom, and make some?
No, look, you've covered this well. So I have the two final questions that I ask you, but before I do, I just have one more question for you. So if I were to say to you, Deirdre, I'm going to probably throw this challenge at you now for the future. By subject, if you take those three questions, leadership questions, the first one is, what am I missing? The second one is, how are motivations aligned or not aligned of the key players? And then the third one is, how do I do this work, or how do I make it better, the situation better? So this book would fit in mostly into this section, right?
This section, because what has to happen is a leader needs to understand that they're not even ready to start the strategy process, let alone the execution process, until they have the organization and the people right. Yeah. And I think that's why Bossidy and Charan spend so much time talking about people and culture.
Yeah. So if I were going to say to you, all right, Deirdre, from now on, I'm going to ask you another question. Based on where the book fits in these three questions, does this qualify as one of the top three books that you would hand somebody or not hand somebody in this subject?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I consider this a fundamental text in making the jump from strategy to execution. And I hesitated there for a second, because the jump from strategy to execution is very similar mentally from the jump to just being a tech person developing a product to starting to get into the marketplace and do product market fit. It's understanding how you get beyond your basic idea into making it a real business where you can actually make money.
Yeah, this is a tricky game, because when you talk about people, and this was a lot about people, this whole thing was a lot about people. And so I'll let you take your slide down to ask the final questions for you here. So, before I get to them, so when we look at the span of the people that we mentor through our system, right? We have sitting CEOs that are not CEOs and board members, and that's a very different process of working with them. Then we have the right, wanting to be an entrepreneur or being a starting entrepreneur or being somebody who's early product market fit people. And then we have a group that are in mid-career.
Right.
And they've done one company or they're in the C ranks wanting to be the CEO. It's interesting that the bulk of our work is in these two, right? Getting them ready to transition here, or to really this one of becoming a founder and entrepreneur. There's a lot of work after the master's degree, right? Whether it's an MBA or even if you don't have one, even there, it's applying it all. And even if you study with us, we did a lot. I mean, all our curriculum is about applying, right? And we have a whole new one that we're have created for the future, for the MBA of the future or the whatever of the future. But the work and then it's getting the mid-career person to begin thinking and functioning really effectively being able to go in and be successful as a very top leader. And then for these, it's helping them with what they potentially could be missing, right? Because of the things that are going on. So it's fascinating work, the stuff we do. But this one is applicable to every one of those people, I believe, right? And so now I'll come to my final questions. Who would you not hand this book to?
A beginning entrepreneur, because I think many beginning entrepreneurs that you and I've worked with, Tom, don't understand enough about business. We need to work with them a little bit and get them to start to enter the marketplace before they'll even have some of these concepts in mind.
So essentially they have to be, I'm putting words in your mouth because I don't ask you these questions ahead of time, right? So is it when they're just beginning to get into product market fit, Deirdre, or when they're deep into product market fit? When do you introduce this book to someone? Because we have at least one of the entrepreneurs or founders we're working with that is in that early stage, right?
What I'd actually do is pick up individual concepts from the book and introduce them at the right time. When someone is hiring the second person or the
Right.
That's when you start to talk with them about people and the skills they need to accomplish work. When they're really getting into the product market fit, that's when you start to talk to them about the processes needed to make sure you get the feedback and build that into your product and build that into your product descriptions and so forth. Even do your first marketing piece, however primitive that is, and so forth. And then what I'd say is when they start to get money, seed money maybe, or Series A, something like that. That's when they have to start to think about all of these things. And that's when I might have them read the book.
Yeah, and I may be able to refine the discussion to say it's really more like institutional seed or a really institutional low end A.
Right.
I'm with you. Who would you hand this book to?
Anyone.
Everybody else, right? I think we all know the answer.
The board down through all, and particularly because I feel so strongly that execution is so much more critical in this digital age. I would make sure that every board director reads this, because most board directors are years away from execution if they ever did execution.
Yeah, no, that's very true.
And they need to think through all of these processes in terms of where the company is going in a digital age.
Very true. Thank you, Deirdre. Any final words you want to say? I think
I think I've covered it. Read this book, people. You'll get a lot out of it.
Except when you're a founder. Once you focused on working both on your business and on your product.
Right.
And that's your distinction, right? That's really the distinction.
Right.
All right. It's a pleasure.
It's a pleasure, Tom. So long for now.
Okay, bye. See you later.
Bye.